Hello and welcome to St. Bernard High School's Coastal Speaker Series at Home Edition. I'm your host, Jamie Mark, the Director of Community Partnerships and Advancement Events. Today we have an interesting guest for multiple reasons. First, he's a graduate of St. Bernard High School, and second, his professional career is deeply rooted in politics and community service, which are two extremely relevant topics right now. Rahn Mayo, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Jamie. Glad to be with you.
First, it would be great if you could talk a little bit about your background. You grew up in Southern California, but then you moved to the South for college. So talk a little bit about that and what drew you to the right coast.
Sure. My childhood was spent in Los Angeles, born and raised in LA. I lived in Inglewood. And as you know, I attended St. Bernard High School, proud Viking. My childhood was phenomenal. I can't complain. I had great parents, structure at home, good education all throughout my years in elementary and high school, rewarding experiences on that campus there in Playa del Rey. St. Bernard was certainly a great part of my development. And when I left for college, I graduated in 1993, and my parents decided they wanted to retire and relocate. They wanted a different lifestyle, a retirement lifestyle, wanted to manage their cost of living. So they decided to move to Atlanta, where my brother was living at the time. And they really enjoyed the climate and the people and the culture, and decided Atlanta would be a good place to live in their retirement years. So the decision for me was made by mom and dad. My only room when I went home for Christmas or summer break while attending Howard University in Washington, D.C., my home was Atlanta. So initially it was difficult. It was somewhat of a culture shock to leave Los Angeles and now have to wake up during Christmas break. My first Christmas home was a new home. So it was now Georgia, not Atlanta, but Fayette County, which is a suburb of Atlanta, south of the city, and completely rocked my world. I didn't ever expect to remain in Georgia, but over time, it grew on me. And I realized that home is where your family lives and where you feel rooted because of the love and the environment around you. So my home became Georgia by the actions of my family when they relocated. When I finished college, again, didn't expect to find myself back in Atlanta, but my parents were here and I had a job opportunity. So I located to Atlanta and began my adult life. And that was in 1997. And all throughout my childhood, I was active in community service. My dad made sure that I was exposed to different experiences, whether it was volunteering at a clothing drive or feed the hungry initiatives in the community. And when I was in high school at St. Bernard, one of the requirements was community service. So I volunteered at a hospital. I believe it was Daniel Freeman Hospital in Inglewood, where I spent several hours as a volunteer. So from that early foundation in service, it shaped my views and shaped my desire when I was at a point in life and ready to take a leadership role in the community. Those early experiences shaped my desire and kind of the light that came on in my early 20s. And that light was what sort of exposed me to electoral politics. And as someone who was engaged in the community and recognized the connection between home prices and the general welfare in a community, and some of the things that were influenced and shaped by government, be it education, public safety, all of these things were being impacted by government, politicians, and decision makers who were empowered to lead and shape the lives of so many people. And I believed I had something to offer, and I stepped forward and offered myself as a candidate for state representative. I represented a district of about 55,000, so I campaigned, and somehow I won the election, and that led to 8 years of service in the Georgia House of Representatives.
That's an amazing story. That's amazing story. So that's actually an interesting lead into what this is leading into my Georgia questions, because Georgia's been in the news a lot with everything going on in this country right now in the pandemic and how it's affecting literally every single human being in the world, but it's, in our country. Georgia is still a state that you hear a lot about. You hear a lot about the governor and his decision making. I'm not even putting any adjectives around that. I'm just going to use the phrase his decision making. Do you think what's going on is making people pay attention more? Do you think it is people will respond now differently? People that didn't always pay attention to their local and federal laws, elections, what was happening. Do you think it's making people open up their eyes, like they're seeing this domino effect of look what's going on in my country, and they're thinking backwards, like, well, maybe I need to pay attention. We have an election coming up, or I do need to have a say in these things. I do need to pay attention more. Do you think people are starting to kind of connect those dots?
You asked a two-part question, and it's a very good one. So on one hand, the question is, will they pay attention more, and are they more aware? And to that, I would say yes, absolutely. The polarizing nature of information and coverage of current events is such that it's hard to not recognize what's going on. The other part of your question is, how will they respond? And that is the question that I grapple with, and I'm not sure. And if you look at the history of elections in this country, when there have been traumatic events and crisis events and poor decision making and dissatisfaction among citizens, it does not always translate into overwhelming turnout at election time. It does not always turn into radical change and reform. So there are two parts to that question. One is, yes, I think people will pay attention. I think people will inherently become more aware of what's going on, simply because it's hard to block out the reality of being sheltered in place and unable to enjoy the lifestyle that you had a month or two ago, and having your world, your social life, radically transformed by no action of your own. So yes, people will become more aware and pay closer attention. And my hope is that yes, it will translate into more action and deliberate behavior on the part of citizens to be more engaged in politics, in the decisions that governors are making, that presidents and local school boards and district attorneys are making related to criminal justice issues. Yes, I absolutely wholeheartedly hope and will continue to encourage the communities that I have any indirect influence on to participate in the process and to be more engaged and to hold leadership accountable.
So to take off apart what you said, out here in California, people here are taking the shelter at home. We still are under this very specific stay at home. Businesses are not really opening, and people are taking it quite seriously. Even, we're almost 2 months in, and it's still, the streets are very quiet. Everyone's got masks on. It's not being received that way in other parts of the country. And there's, protests. People have very different opinions on it. And there's sort of the two sides of, well, we need to get back to work. I'm not talking about what the federal government is saying. I'm just talking about what citizens are saying. Mm-hmm. We need to get back to work and, protesting. And then there's the folks that are sort of understanding that in order to work on this as a health issue, people need to stay home. So we notice, though, that there are certain areas of the country, though, where people are listening to the health side of things, and certain areas of the country where they just want to go back to work. Do you have a thought on that? Like, is that a blue or red kind of a thing? Where is that coming from? Where there are people that are they following the lead of their government leadership, their local leadership, or is that just people are? That's a question I keep trying to figure out. I work, being at St. Bernard, I don't have any kids myself, but I think about where if the kids are still home because the kids can't go back to school, what are other, I mean, these are high school kids, so it's a little different, but where are all these parents, what are they going to do if their kids are still home? So I always wonder, where are these people that are, we need to go back to work, are they thinking about the ripple effect? And I'm just wondering if you have any opinion on, a person's mindset that says, let's go back to work, and everything else will get figured out.
Right. I think all of us are making our best effort to balance and to consider every potential impact and outcome from our behavior and the decisions we're making during this time. I would point to, and I think there are segments of the population everywhere, in every state, who have been somewhat irresponsible and very carefree in their social engagement. I'll point to the beaches in Orange County, California, where we saw large crowds and protesters demanding that they have some of the liberties and freedoms that they deserve. And it's a difficult balance, because on one hand, we're a nation of giving that liberty and free will and allowing people to have many of those social privileges in society. And it's hard to rein that in when you have a kind of a shocking event that comes out of nowhere and surprises everyone. And then we instantly ask everyone to just shut it down and hope that their behavior and their mentality adjust instantly. And I just don't think it has happened for everyone in that way. Another thing I would point to, you asked whether or not it was a blue and red state factor that perhaps could be leading to some of the decisions. And I think there's an element of political ideology involved in the decision making. I, as a legislator, recall having a bill to require hands-free devices. So in Georgia, for a very long time, beyond when other states enacted policies to require mobile communications, wireless devices, so an earpiece when you're talking on your phone. And the bill I sponsored in I believe 2013, 14, and 15 was met with resistance. And what I was told is, yes, we believe this would be good behavior and responsible for someone to wear a hands-free device. However, we don't want to be a nanny state. We don't want government to intrude on the personal liberties that individuals have to make decisions that unfortunately impact other lives. And I think that's what we're facing now, is on one hand, there are many people who don't want to be forced by government, be it federal or state or local, to tell them they must shelter in place. They must remain at home. It's one posture for government to suggest and encourage, but then sometimes I think people feel like they're being put in a box and having rights taken away from them unjustly. And in Georgia, I think the conservative nature of the leadership in this state is such that there is a resistance to anything that appears to be resembling a nanny state or overzealous government action. And in general, in politics, I think what you hear on the right is less government, and on the left, more protection and more regulations to help and ensure that there's fairness and safety in the private sector practices. So it's a difficult balance. And yes, I do think regional cultural differences will weigh in and determine how those decisions are made and how it plays out. Another last factor I'd point out there, Jamie, is in Georgia, a good portion, so maybe half of our population, and I believe our population is somewhere around 10 million, and 40 to 50% of our population lives in rural parts of the state. And I think what our governor pointed to was that in Georgia, we have hot spots. So there are some areas that have been hit a lot harder, much like the country.
Albany, I know Albany was an area that was hit really hard.
Indeed. In Atlanta, where I live, and in some of our surrounding suburban counties and adjacent counties, DeKalb, Fulton County have been really affected. Hall County, where there's a chicken or meat processing plant. Albany, same thing there. I think the governor looks at the data and receives confusing at best, inconsistent at best data and guidance from the president and the federal government, which has taken a very passive approach, in my opinion, in instructing and advising and really putting their muscle behind encouraging responsible behavior and consistency. And part of that is the sovereignty and the decisions that are made at the state level, and I understand that. However, I think a lack of guidance and a lack of responsible decision making at the federal level led to this fragmented and each state for themselves mentality, and each state had to review a set of data and look at the population and the makeup of their state. And in Georgia, the makeup again is such that half of our population thereabout lives in rural areas. Many of these areas have very low outbreak numbers, and the governor, I would imagine, has received feedback and has received some political pressure from those folks who live in these rural communities and are already, by nature of how those communities are built, are social. They're socially
spread out, yeah.
They're spread out, and there's not the same density as you'd find in Atlanta or New York City. So again, I think it's different strokes for different folks. All politics is local, and it's in the interest of a governor, a state leader, to balance and weigh all considerations. And my personal opinion is that our governor jumped the gun, was a little premature, and didn't offer enough of a plan to instruct barbers and beauticians and the massage therapists and
bowling alleys, tattoo parlors.
Bowling alleys. I don't think it's one thing to want to review the data, make a decision in the best interest of a state, and another thing to open up and to do that without a sound and very well thought out plan on how that was going to be implemented and what the expectations were of those operators. Because many operators went back to the workplace ill-prepared for the safety requirements that the state provided maybe a day before they were encouraged and given the opportunity to open. And they just simply weren't ready. So if there were better planning at the state and local level, more coordinated planning, I think it may have been a little better received.
They were basically kind of winging it a little bit.
They were winging it. Yeah.
So,
and in fairness, again, they're reviewing data and from what I hear and can glean, have health experts weighing in, but by all indications, the appearance is that, yes, they were winging it.
So to that kind of what you were saying with everything being spread out, that southeast quadrant of the country tends to vote fairly conservatively. Do you think this won't then have an effect on how they look at voting come presidential time? Because things are so spread out, like even though we see there's only certain areas that are really being affected by this. I mean, the numbers are pretty big. When we see these numbers on TV, let's say out here, you see these numbers in the New Orleans area, we see them in, areas of Georgia, we see them in, in Florida, how that you're seeing it. Like those states do vote fairly conservatively at times. Do you think people are now looking at this and going, wait, this leadership got us here. We need something different, or is kind of what you're saying, well, it was only certain spots that are really being affected. So it's that being hit by this and these death numbers are really not going to affect how people go out and vote. It's going to be the same people voting the same way they did 4 years ago.
Right. So I think the base of support of our governor will be pleased with the decision. And frankly, I believe that's where the political will was inspired by the conservative interests, those rural communities and those who want less government oversight, regulation, and enforcement on lifestyle choices, I think they will be pleased with the decision, provided we don't have any extreme outbreaks and something that just spirals out of control and becomes a lot worse. I think on the other side, conversely, the parties and interests that are displeased will continue to vote against the interests that they believe have caused harm and exaggerated an already severe crisis. So to answer your question, I think those who have been on the right will remain on the right and remain steadfast in their support and feel encouraged and inspired by the decisions of their political leaders. And I think those on the left, and we'll talk about the center in a second, I think those on the left primarily will respond with disappointment and concern, and look to use this moment to remind people why leadership is important and why it's important to have leaders that reflect your views and your value system. The political center, which I think is a very narrow swath of people in our state and across the country, I'm not sure. I'm not sure which way those voters will turn and how they will perceive the decisions of our government. I can only say that time will tell, and I think this crisis has yet to be determined. The story has yet to be written, and we'll just have to wait and see how the data kind of unfold and where this leads in terms of the health and the economic status of our country.
So you spend a lot of your time now, your community service, that side of you focuses on education. And
yes.
How do you feel with, kids now with their, everybody kind of learning differently, the uncertainty of how kids will be learning in the fall? How do you feel? Are you concerned, or are your contemporaries or people that really, I'm not talking about principals and people that are teaching, people that kind of are on the periphery and can kind of look at the macro level. How do you feel the kids and students, younger people, not necessarily like seniors that are about to go off to college, they're sort of done, but we're talking sort of the ones that are most delicate, maybe, middle school, that age, how do you feel their education is going to be affected to the point where when they get to high school, we're going to see how this period of time might have affected their development? Do you think this is going to have an effect if this crucial period of time in their learning is sort of up in the air? Because I know we hear different, coincidentally in St. Bernard, we've had very good feedback from our parents that the kids are doing really well, but you hear a lot, you hear all kinds of things that they're not, the distance learning is not going well, it's hard, kids don't respond. So do you have an opinion on what's going to look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now? What is it for the students, the adults at that point that had this weird break in the middle of their education?
Sure. So the early anecdotal data I've reviewed has suggested that high school children will fare much better. They're much more capable of adapting to an online virtual environment. They have a lot more experience with computers and technology, the developmental aspect, and their attention span is much different from that of a kindergartner. The other difference, I think, will be with children who come from poor households. So the achievement gap, in my opinion, will grow for those children with less means to pay for technology, and they may have a home with more distractions, and they may not have had the same preparation and ability to make the transition. So I think those children, poor children, will be affected at a much more significant in a much more significant and impactful way than those children who may have had the resources, the technology, the parental guidance at home, and great resources from which to grow and maintain their cutting edge advantage. So I think poor children and children who did not have the foundation will suffer more, and those who previously had the resources will have a difficult time with the adaptation of new technology and a new way of learning. However, I think it will be a little easier because when a child has a traumatic experience, let's education aside, the trauma that we all have endured through this crisis, this period of the pandemic, I think is going to have a profound effect on most people in some way or another. But I think that effect is compounded when you take a small child who may have already been disadvantaged.
Got it. Makes sense. Last question before I let you go. I'm sure you are asked about Stacey Abrams quite a lot. I know you crossed paths with her many, many times. She's her name is thrown out so much these days as a potential vice presidential candidate. I know she's so active. That's her focus now on voters' rights. What do you think? How do you feel about her potential out there to be a potential candidate now, maybe 4 years from now, 10 years from now? What do you think?
I served with Stacey for 8 years in the Georgia House of Representatives, and I will tell you, she has always struck me as a very thoughtful and a brilliant thinker. She has an extraordinary political mind. She oftentimes would confound many of our colleagues with her presentation and the way she dissected legislation and was able to articulate views and really make the case for a policy position. I think Stacey is an incredible leader. I'm proud to have served with her. I'm proud to have been a student of her teaching and her extraordinary talent as a political star. And I think one day she will make an awesome president. And if she's given the opportunity, I think would be a great choice for a nominee to choose as a vice president or a cabinet official.
I think she's amazing too, and I don't even know her even a millimeter as much as you do. Thank you. I appreciate your time. I could talk to you about this stuff for days, but I won't. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule. I'm sure you have a million things to do. And I thank everybody for listening. And we wish anybody who has any interest in participating in our emergency relief fund, there'll be a link at the bottom of your screen. And have a great day. Thanks, Ron, for joining.
Thank you, Jamie.